So, let's learn some history.
X-rays. Wilhelm Röntgen was a German physicist who spent most of his time playing with electricity and vacuum tubes in a dark laboratory. One night in 1895, he was conducting experiments with a cathode ray tube and covered it with thick black cardboard to block all light. He wanted to see if the invisible rays could escape the glass tube. When he turned on the power, suddenly he noticed a fluorescent screen across the room was glowing with a mysterious green light. This was physically impossible because the equipment was completely shielded and the room was pitch black. He realized that some kind of unknown ray was passing right through the solid cardboard and traveling across the air. He began placing different objects in front of the tube, like books and pieces of wood, to see if the light would stop. But the rays passed through almost everything, as if it were made of water. He then held his own hand in front of the tube and was absolutely horrified to see the shadow of his skeleton projected onto the wall. He could see his bones and the skin around them as a faint gray outline, which was the first time any human had seen inside a living body without using a knife. He brought his wife into the lab to take a picture of her hand using the rays, which resulted in the famous image showing her wedding ring floating on a finger bone. When she saw the skeletal image, she famously screamed that she had seen her own death because it looked like a ghost. It took less than a year for doctors around the world to start using this technology to find broken bones and swallowed objects. Röntgen refused to patent his discovery because he wanted the world to benefit from it for free. It transformed medicine from a guessing game into a precise science, all because a scientist noticed a weird glow in the dark.
The microwave. Percy Spencer was a self-taught engineer working for the Raytheon Corporation during the peak of World War II. He was a genius with electronics and was busy testing a high-powered vacuum tube known as a magnetron. These tubes were used to generate short radio waves for military radar systems to detect enemy planes in the dark. One afternoon, Spencer was standing right in front of an active machine when he noticed a very warm and gooey sensation in his pocket. He reached down and realized that his favorite chocolate peanut cluster bar had completely turned into a liquid mess. Instead of just being annoyed about his ruined pants, he started wondering why the candy had melted without any external heat source. He was the first person to realize that the microwave radiation from the radar tube was actually vibrating the water molecules inside his snack. He decided to run a more scientific test by placing a brown paper bag of unpopped corn kernels right in front of the machine. Within a few seconds, the entire laboratory was filled with the sound of white kernels exploding all over the floor. Next, he tried to cook a whole egg, which resulted in it exploding with enough force to cover his coworker's face in hot yolk. He realized that this invisible energy could cook food faster than any traditional wood or gas oven on Earth. Raytheon eventually built the first commercial microwave oven, which was 6 feet tall and weighed over 700 pounds. Back then, it was called the Raider Range and cost more than a brand new car, but it started a revolution in how humans prepare food in their homes. Today, we use this technology to heat up leftovers in 30 seconds without ever realizing it was originally a weapon of war meant to find bombers in the sky. Spencer turned a ruined candy bar into the most common kitchen appliance in human history.
The Slinky. Richard James was a mechanical engineer working for the United States Navy during the height of the Second World War. In 1943, he was busy trying to develop a system of specialized springs that could support and stabilize sensitive instruments on ships, even in rough seas. He had a large stack of different steel springs on a shelf in his laboratory when he accidentally knocked one of them over with his arm. Instead of just falling flat on the floor, the spring began to move in a bizarre and fluid motion. It stepped down from the shelf and onto a stack of books, then walked onto a table and finally landed perfectly upright on the floor. James was absolutely stunned by the physics of the accident and spent the rest of the night watching the spring walk back and forth. He told his wife Betty that he thought he could turn the industrial mistake into a fun toy for children. She came up with the name Slinky after looking through a dictionary for a word that described a sleek and graceful movement. They spent 2 years perfecting the steel formula and then demonstrated the toy at a department store in Philadelphia during the Christmas season. They were so nervous that nobody would care about a piece of wire, but all 400 units sold out in less than 90 minutes. Today, over 300 million Slinkies have been sold across the globe, and it is considered one of the most iconic toys in history. It even went to space on a shuttle mission to test how gravity affects its movement. It is the perfect example of how a boring piece of military hardware can become a source of joy for millions of people, all because an engineer was a little bit clumsy at his desk. It proved that a failed experiment in naval engineering can become a household name if you just give it a funny name and a staircase to walk down. Gunpowder. Long before modern science existed, ancient Chinese alchemists were obsessed with finding a secret formula for eternal life. During the 9th century, these researchers were mixing together all sorts of random natural ingredients to create an elixir of immortality. They believed that if they found the right combination of chemicals, they could live forever as gods. One afternoon, a group of alchemists decided to mix together sulfur and charcoal along with a white powder known as saltpeter. They were hoping to create a potion that would heal the body. But instead, they created the most explosive substance in human history. While they were heating the mixture over a fire, it suddenly ignited and created a massive flash of blinding light and a roar like thunder. The explosion was so powerful that it burned the faces and hands of the alchemists and completely destroyed the building they were working in. They realized very quickly that they had not found the secret to living forever, but rather a way to end life very quickly. The Chinese military began using this fire medicine to create primitive flamethrowers and eventually the world's first rockets and bombs. It took a few hundred years for the technology to travel to Europe, where it was refined into the gunpowder used in cannons and muskets. It is incredibly ironic that the search for eternal life resulted in the invention of the deadliest weapon in the history of warfare. Gunpowder completely changed the landscape of politics and destroyed the Age of Knights in heavy armor, all because a few alchemists were playing with chemicals they did not understand. It is a dark accident that proves how a single mistake in a lab can change the destiny of every nation on the planet for the next 1,000 years.
Post-it notes. Spencer Silver was a chemist working for the 3M company in 1968 who was trying to develop a super strong adhesive for the aerospace industry. He wanted to create a glue so powerful that it could hold a plane together, but his experiment went horribly wrong. He ended up creating a unique substance that was actually very weak and only slightly tacky. It had the strange ability to stick to surfaces, but could be peeled off easily without leaving any sticky residue behind. Silver spent several years trying to convince his bosses that his failed glue was actually useful, but nobody could think of a reason to buy a glue that did not actually stay stuck. The breakthrough finally happened 10 years later, when a coworker named Art Fry was singing in his church choir. Fry was frustrated because the little paper bookmarks in his hymnal kept falling out every time he opened the book. He remembered Silver's weird, weak glue and decided to coat some small scraps of yellow paper with the substance. He realized he had created the perfect bookmark that would stay in place but never damaged the pages of the book. 3M launched the product under the name Press and Peel, but it failed in the beginning because nobody understood why they needed it. The company decided to give away free samples to offices and realized that people became addicted to the convenience of the little yellow squares. Today, Post-it notes are a multi-billion-dollar business used in almost every office and school on Earth. It is a classic case of a failed product finding a massive purpose in a completely different industry. Silver failed at making a strong glue, but succeeded at changing how the world communicates. It proves that even a mistake can be a massive success if you find the right problem to solve with it.
Vulcanized rubber. Charles Goodyear was a man possessed by a single vision of making rubber a useful material for the world. In the early 1800s, natural rubber was a complete disaster because it would melt into a sticky puddle in the summer heat and turn as brittle as glass during the freezing winter months. Goodyear spent years in extreme poverty trying to find a way to stabilize the substance, and he even went to debtor's prison because he spent all his money on failed experiments. One day, in 1839, he was in his kitchen showing off his latest mixture of rubber and sulfur to a group of skeptics. In a moment of excitement, he accidentally dropped a glob of the mixture onto a red-hot stove. Instead of melting into a liquid mess, the rubber actually charred and became a tough, leather-like material that remained flexible even when it got cold. He realized he had finally found the secret process, which he named vulcanization after the Roman god of fire. It was a total accident that allowed rubber to be used for everything from waterproof boots to the tires on your car. Today, Goodyear never actually made much money from his discovery and died with a massive amount of debt, but his name became one of the most famous brands in the automotive industry. It is a story of extreme obsession and a lucky mistake that literally put the world on wheels. Without that hot stove accident, we would still be stuck using wooden wheels and leaky shoes. It proves that sometimes you have to lose everything before you stumble upon the one mistake that changes history forever.
Safety glass. Edouard Benedictus was a French chemist working in his laboratory in 1903 when he accidentally knocked a glass flask off a high shelf onto the hard floor. He expected the flask to shatter into thousands of dangerous shards, but to his absolute surprise, the glass remained in one piece, even though it was covered in a web of cracks. He realized that the flask had previously contained a liquid plastic called nitrocellulose, which had evaporated and left a thin, transparent coating on the inside of the glass. This invisible film was strong enough to hold the shattered pieces together even after a violent impact. Benedictus immediately saw the potential for this discovery, because car windshields at the time were made of ordinary glass that could kill people during a crash. He spent the next few years perfecting the design of triplex, which was the world's first safety glass, made by sandwiching a layer of plastic between two sheets of glass. The invention was ignored by car manufacturers at first because they thought it was too expensive, but it became standard equipment after World War I when it was used for gas mask lenses and armored vehicles. Today, every single car on the road uses a version of this accidental technology to keep passengers safe from flying glass. It is a discovery that has saved millions of lives since the invention of the automobile, all because a chemist was clumsy enough to drop his equipment. It shows how a simple lab accident can solve a serious problem that nobody even realized was fixable.
Matches. John Walker was a British pharmacist in the 1820s who was busy trying to find a way to create a new type of explosive for his customers. He was using a wooden stick to stir together a dangerous mixture of antimony sulfide and potassium chlorate in a small pot. When he finished, he noticed that a small blob of the chemical paste had dried on the end of his stirring stick. He tried to scrape the dried lump off against the stone hearth of his fireplace and was shocked when the entire stick suddenly burst into a bright and steady flame. Before this moment, starting a fire was a slow and difficult process that involved using flint and steel or rubbing sticks together for a long time. Walker realized that he had accidentally invented the world's first friction match, which allowed anyone to create fire in an instant. He began selling his invention in small cardboard boxes, but he surprisingly refused to patent the idea because he wanted it to be useful for the general public. A businessman named Isaac Holden eventually took the idea and turned it into a massive global industry, while Walker remained a humble shopkeeper. It is a simple but revolutionary invention that ended the dark ages of fire starting and made life easier for every human on the planet. It is incredible to think that the most basic tool in your kitchen was discovered because a pharmacist was just trying to clean up his workspace. Walker did not find a new explosive, but he found a way to bring light and warmth to the world with a single strike of a stick. It is the final proof that the most world-changing ideas are often hiding in the most mundane mistakes.
Penicillin. Alexander Fleming was a brilliant Scottish scientist working at St. Mary's Hospital in 1928. He was actually quite famous for having a very messy laboratory filled with old equipment. He decided to take a much-needed 2-week summer vacation with his family, but he forgot to clean his workstation before leaving. His lab was filled with petri dishes containing a deadly bacteria called staphylococci, which he just left sitting out in the open air while he was away. A stray mold spore drifted through an open window and landed perfectly in one of his dirty dishes. When Fleming finally returned from his holiday, he started sorting through his trash to see what had grown. He noticed a very strange, clear zone around a patch of fuzzy green mold in one specific container. The mold had created a powerful chemical shield that was literally dissolving every single bacteria cell that tried to get near it. Instead of throwing the mess away, Fleming realized he was looking at a miracle of nature that could change medicine forever. He identified the substance as penicillin, which became the world's first true antibiotic weapon against infection. Before this discovery, a simple infected scratch from a garden rose could easily result in a painful death. It took another decade and a team of researchers at Oxford to turn this mold into a mass-produced drug for soldiers in World War II. Fleming ended up winning the Nobel Prize for his discovery, all because he was too lazy to wash his dishes before going on a trip. It remains the most significant medical accident in human history that has saved hundreds of millions of people from certain doom. The mold was basically a microscopic superhero that Fleming stumbled upon by total luck. It proved that sometimes a bit of filth can actually save the entire world.